What if people don't follow power, but the illusion of power? Most people believe influence comes from real authority, wealth, or status. But psychology tells a more uncomfortable truth. Humans react more strongly to perceived power than to actual power. This is where dark psychology begins. When someone appears calm, confident, and emotionally controlled, the brain instantly categorizes them as dominant. It doesn't matter if that dominance is real. What matters is the perception. In human behavior, perception quietly shapes attraction, respect, and obsession. Have you ever noticed how the most confident person in the room automatically gains attention? It's not magic. It's psychological signaling. The human brain constantly scans for leaders and high-status individuals. In evolutionary terms, aligning with powerful figures increased survival. That instinct still operates today. This is why dark psychology tactics often begin with projecting certainty. The moment someone speaks slowly, moves calmly, and refuses to chase approval, they trigger subconscious admiration. People start assuming this person must know something others don't. Why do people trust someone who looks powerful even before they prove it? Because the brain hates uncertainty. When someone presents themselves with strong posture, controlled emotions, and unwavering belief in their own value, they remove doubt from the interaction. In both psychology and philosophy, certainty creates authority, and authority influences behavior. This is why many manipulation tactics focus on shaping perception first. If you control how people see you, you indirectly control how they treat you. Have you ever wondered why emotionally reactive people lose influence instantly? Because emotional reactions break the illusion of power. In dark psychology, composure is one of the strongest signals of dominance. The moment someone reacts impulsively, getting defensive, explaining too much, or seeking validation, they reveal insecurity. And insecurity weakens psychological authority. The calmest individual in a tense moment becomes the perceived leader. This is not coincidence. It is a deep human instinct responding to stability. Why do mysterious, composed personalities seem more magnetic than loud ones? Because silence amplifies perception. When someone does not constantly seek attention, their presence feels intentional. In many dark psychology tactics, influence is built through restraint, speaking less, reacting less, revealing less. These behaviors force others to project meaning onto that silence. And when people start projecting importance onto you, the illusion of power grows stronger. What happens when people begin believing you are powerful, even if you say nothing? Their behavior changes. They listen more carefully. They question themselves more. They become more emotionally invested in your approval. This is how manipulation tactics often work in subtle psychological dynamics. No force is required. Influence spreads simply through perception. When people assume you hold higher value, they unconsciously adjust their behavior to maintain your attention. But here's the deeper question. Why does the illusion of power create obsession? Because humans are drawn toward perceived strength. When someone appears internally stable, emotionally controlled, and socially valuable, the brain interprets them as rare, and rarity increases desire. This is where dark psychology and philosophy intersect. Power is not always about control over others. Sometimes it is about controlling the way others interpret you. But perception alone cannot sustain obsession forever, because once the illusion of power attracts attention, another psychological force determines who truly holds the emotional advantage. What if the secret to influence isn't showing emotion, but mastering it? After the illusion of power attracts attention, another force quietly determines who truly holds the advantage: emotional control. In psychology, emotions drive most human decisions. But in dark psychology, the person who controls their emotions controls the interaction. When someone remains calm while others react emotionally, they instantly appear stronger. This is not cruelty, it is perception. The human mind naturally assumes that the emotionally stable person is the one with greater power. Have you ever noticed how people become more interested when you stop chasing them? It feels strange, almost unfair, but this reaction is deeply rooted in human psychology. When someone senses emotional independence, their brain interprets it as higher value. In many dark psychology tactics, emotional detachment becomes a silent signal of scarcity. The moment you stop appearing dependent on someone's attention, they begin questioning their own position. Suddenly, they start investing more effort into maintaining your interest. Why does caring too much sometimes push people away? Because excessive emotional exposure removes psychological tension. In both philosophy and psychology, tension is the fuel of curiosity. When someone gives constant reassurance, constant validation, and constant availability, the mind relaxes. There is no mystery left to explore. But when emotional signals become balanced and controlled, curiosity grows. This is why many manipulation tactics revolve around emotional rhythm, giving attention, then stepping back, allowing the mind to wander. Have you ever replayed someone's behavior in your mind because you couldn't fully understand their feelings? That mental replay is the beginning of obsession. The brain hates uncertainty. When someone's emotional signals are not completely predictable, the mind starts searching for answers. In dark psychology, this uncertainty becomes a powerful tool. Emotional detachment does not mean coldness. It means refusing to let your emotional state depend entirely on someone else. That independence creates intrigue. Why do emotionally reactive people lose influence in difficult situations? Because emotional reactions reveal vulnerability. In dark psychology tactics, the moment someone becomes defensive, angry, or desperate for approval, their leverage disappears. The calm person automatically becomes the psychological anchor of the interaction. Humans naturally gravitate toward individuals who appear internally balanced. Stability feels powerful, instability feels risky. What happens when you stop reacting and start observing instead? The dynamic shifts instantly. Instead of trying to prove yourself, you begin understanding the emotional patterns of others. In psychology, awareness creates influence. When you recognize how emotions guide behavior, you can respond strategically rather than impulsively. Many historical figures associated with Machiavellian philosophy mastered this skill, remaining composed while others revealed their intentions through emotional reactions. But why does emotional detachment make someone unforgettable? Because it creates psychological space. When someone is not constantly demanding attention or validation, their presence feels rare, and rarity increases perceived value. This principle appears repeatedly in both philosophy and manipulation tactics throughout history. The one who appears less emotionally dependent becomes harder to replace. Yet emotional control alone does not fully explain why certain individuals become magnetic. Because once power and emotional stability are established, another psychological force begins amplifying curiosity. Have you ever noticed how the people you understand the least often stay in your mind the longest? After power and emotional control establish psychological influence, something even more powerful begins to take shape: mystery. In psychology, the human brain is naturally drawn to unanswered questions. When something feels incomplete, the mind keeps returning to it again and again. This is where dark psychology quietly takes control. The less predictable someone becomes, the more mental energy people invest trying to understand them. Why do people lose interest when everything about someone is completely revealed? Because certainty kills curiosity. When every intention, every thought, and every emotion is openly explained, the brain stops searching for answers. In both psychology and philosophy, curiosity is fueled by the unknown. This is why many dark psychology tactics revolve around controlled revelation, sharing just enough information to spark intrigue, but never enough to remove all mystery. When the mind senses there is more beneath the surface, fascination grows. Have you ever replayed someone's words in your head long after the conversation ended? That mental replay is psychological tension. The brain naturally tries to resolve ambiguity. When someone's behavior, tone, or intentions are slightly unclear, the mind begins analyzing every detail. In dark psychology tactics, this tension becomes a powerful influence tool. Instead of forcing attention, mystery allows attention to grow naturally. People become curious not because they are told to care, but because their own minds cannot stop searching for answers. Why do mysterious personalities often appear more attractive and influential? Because mystery suggests depth. In human psychology, depth signals intelligence, complexity, and emotional strength. When someone does not constantly explain themselves or reveal every plan, others begin assuming there is something significant beneath that silence. This is why many historical thinkers connected to Machiavellian philosophy emphasized strategic restraint. Information, when controlled carefully, becomes a subtle form of power. What happens when people cannot fully predict your behavior? Their attention increases instantly. The brain thrives on patterns, but when those patterns suddenly become unpredictable, focus intensifies. In many manipulation tactics, controlled unpredictability creates emotional spikes. When responses are not always immediate, when actions are not always obvious, curiosity grows stronger. And curiosity keeps someone mentally invested in you. Have you ever wondered why silence sometimes feels more powerful than speaking? Because silence invites interpretation. When someone does not immediately clarify their intentions, others begin filling the gaps with their own assumptions. In dark psychology, this psychological projection amplifies fascination. The less you reveal, the more people imagine. And imagination often creates stronger emotional attachment than direct explanation ever could. But does mystery mean deception? Not necessarily. True strategic mystery is not about lying, it is about controlling what you reveal and when. In both philosophy and psychology, influence often comes from timing. When information is delivered slowly and deliberately, it maintains curiosity. When everything is revealed instantly, intrigue disappears. This balance is why mystery has been one of the oldest manipulation tactics in social dynamics. So what happens when power, emotional detachment, and mystery combine? A psychological presence begins to form, one that feels difficult to read, difficult to predict, and impossible to ignore. People start wondering about your intentions, analyzing your behavior, and paying closer attention to every signal you send. But curiosity alone does not create lasting obsession, because once mystery captures attention, another force begins shaping how valuable you appear in the eyes of others. Have you ever wondered why people suddenly value something more the moment it becomes harder to get? After power attracts attention, emotional detachment builds intrigue, and mystery captures curiosity, another psychological force begins shaping obsession, scarcity. In psychology, the human mind automatically assigns greater value to things that appear limited or rare. When access becomes restricted, desire intensifies. This is not coincidence, it is a deep survival instinct. And in dark psychology, scarcity becomes one of the most effective ways to influence perception and emotional investment. Why do people chase what seems slightly out of reach? Because the brain interprets scarcity as importance. When something is always available, it becomes ordinary. But when availability becomes selective, curiosity turns into pursuit. In many dark psychology tactics, this principle is used to quietly shift power dynamics. Instead of constantly offering attention, time, or emotional energy, strategic scarcity creates psychological tension. And tension makes people invest more effort in maintaining connection. Have you ever noticed how someone's value increases when others compete for them? This reaction is rooted in social psychology. Humans often evaluate worth based on demand. When others show interest in someone, that person instantly appears more valuable. This phenomenon is sometimes called social proof, and it has been recognized for centuries in both philosophy and manipulation tactics. When people believe something is desired by many, their own interest rises automatically. Why does constant availability reduce attraction? Because unlimited access removes urgency. When someone is always present, always responding, always offering attention, the brain stops perceiving their presence as special. In dark psychology, controlled availability becomes a subtle influence strategy. It communicates independence, confidence, and emotional balance. The less someone appears dependent on attention, the more valuable their attention feels when it is given. Have you ever felt more drawn to someone after they pulled away slightly? That reaction is the scarcity principle in action. When distance appears, imagination fills the space. The brain starts asking questions. Why did they pull back? What are they thinking? What am I missing? This mental loop intensifies emotional focus. In many dark psychology tactics, creating small gaps in availability keeps the other person mentally engaged, even when you are not present. What happens when people realize your attention is limited? Their behavior shifts. They listen more carefully. They value small interactions more deeply. When someone understands that your time and emotional energy are not given freely to everyone, your presence begins to feel rare, and rarity increases perceived worth. In both psychology and philosophy, value is often determined not by quantity, but by exclusivity. But is scarcity about manipulation or self-respect? The truth lies somewhere between. Healthy scarcity simply means recognizing that your time, energy, and emotional investment have value. However, in dark psychology and manipulation tactics, scarcity can also be used strategically to influence perception. When people sense that access to you is limited, they instinctively invest more effort to maintain that connection. So what happens when power, emotional control, mystery, and scarcity combine? You become difficult to ignore. Attention increases, curiosity deepens, emotional investment grows. The psychological dynamics shift quietly in your favor, but even these forces are not the final layer of influence. Because in every interaction, one hidden principle ultimately determines who holds true psychological dominance. What if every interaction you've ever had was secretly a battle of perception? After power attracts attention, emotional detachment creates intrigue. Mystery fuels curiosity, and scarcity increases value. One final principle determines who truly controls the dynamic: frame control. In psychology, a frame is the mental context through which people interpret reality. And in dark psychology, the person who controls the frame quietly controls the outcome. When you define how a situation should be understood, others naturally respond within that reality. Have you ever noticed how some people never seem shaken, no matter what happens around them? That is the power of frame control. When someone refuses to react emotionally to pressure, criticism, or tension, they maintain authority over the emotional environment. In many dark psychology tactics, emotional composure becomes a silent weapon. The calmest person in the room appears the most confident, and confidence automatically shifts psychological power in their favor. Why do people lose influence the moment they start defending themselves too much? Because excessive explanation signals insecurity. In both psychology and philosophy, the one who tries hardest to prove their value often appears uncertain about it. In contrast, someone who calmly stands by their perspective projects certainty. This is why many manipulation tactics focus on maintaining a strong frame, speaking with clarity, avoiding emotional reactions, and refusing to accept narratives that weaken your position. Have you ever felt drawn towards someone simply because they seemed completely unfazed? That feeling comes from subconscious psychological submission. When someone appears unaffected by external pressure, their presence signals inner stability. In dark psychology, stability is interpreted as strength. Humans instinctively respect individuals who maintain emotional balance under stress. This is why composure often creates more influence than aggressive dominance. What happens when you define the meaning of every situation before others do? You control the narrative. If someone calls you distant, you frame it as independence. If someone calls you intimidating, you frame it as confidence. This is the essence of frame control. By shaping interpretation, you influence emotional reactions. And when emotions shift, behavior follows. In many advanced dark psychology tactics, influence begins not with force, but with redefining perception. Why do powerful personalities rarely chase approval or validation? Because chasing approval automatically weakens your frame. When someone constantly seeks reassurance, they give others the power to judge their worth. But when someone acts as if their value is already established, the psychological dynamic reverses. Others begin seeking their approval. This quiet shift in power is one of the most effective manipulation tactics in social psychology. What happens when you combine every principle we explored? Power creates presence, emotional detachment builds intrigue, mystery fuels curiosity, scarcity increases value, and frame control locks the entire psychological dynamic in place. At this point, influence no longer feels forced. It becomes natural. People respond differently because the perception of your presence has changed. So what is the final lesson behind Machiavellian psychology? It is not about controlling people through fear or deception. The deeper philosophy of dark psychology is mastering perception, emotion, and self-control. When you control your reactions, your presence, and your narrative, others begin adjusting to your frame without realizing it. And once you understand this, you stop chasing attention. You stop reacting to every opinion. You stop seeking approval. Instead, you quietly become the person whose presence shapes the entire psychological game.